Okay, here we are today, ADP meeting for Thursday, June 21st, Council Chambers. Here to welcome everyone to the Squamish Nation traditional territory. First on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Motion to adopt. Crossing, seconded John. Carried. Minutes of meeting from previous meetings. April 19th, 2018. Motion to adopt those minutes. Crossland, seconded John. Second one. Second one was May 17th ADP meeting. The 21st, May 21st ADP meetings are approved. Now those we didn't have quorum. So what are we approving on?
We still adopt them.
Oh, okay.
Because recognizes that there wasn't.
Right. Okay. Motion to adopt those. Sarah, seconded Chris. Carried. All right, we have a fairly quick meeting it seems. One on the menu for business, and that is the Wilson Crescent Neighborhood Microplan by Susan and Jonas.
I'll introduce Susan. It's Susan Stratus. She's a contract planner working for the district on this project, and we're looking at Wilson Crescent microplan because it's a neighborhood, one of the few neighborhoods that's pre-zoned, and it's been pre-zoned for a while for multifamily residential, and there is still quite a bit of single-family housing there, and we have seen a lot of development interest in development permit applications and rezonings. And what we are trying to do is get in front of all that and determine what are the needs of this little neighborhood before the rezonings or permits with variances are considered. So it is, I'll turn it over to Susan.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, committee. Jonas just covered my first 6 slides in one paragraph, so I'll be able to go through fairly quickly. I'll just identify the area that we're looking at, which is Buckley running along here is the major arterial, and Wilson Crescent is a one-way road system that loops through like this. The high school and elementary school are over to the east of Buckley. So it's an area that's just north of downtown. It's not formally part of the downtown, but it's very much within walking distance of downtown. So as Jonas mentioned, we've had a bit of a public process, which I'll mention further on, and we're looking for general ADP comments. There's no specific application, so just general responses from the ADP today is what we're looking for. So I've mentioned the planning area. The other thing I should mention is that the Wilson Slough forms the northern boundary of this neighborhood, and the eastern boundary is also formed by the rail line. So it's very much a kind of a sheltered, interesting little mixed-use neighborhood that's kind of quite sheltered once you're in there. So the development issues that we're looking at, as Jonas mentioned, there's a lot of single family despite the multifamily zoning, and how to integrate that as development applications come in is certainly kind of top of the list. A number of people are looking at consolidating a number of lots. Some of them are quite large. They're quarter acre in size or so, very long, narrow lots. And the consolidations allow the new developers opportunity for better design, I think, but potentially bring larger scale buildings that are not such a great fit with some of the smaller scale uses that are around there. So the narrow one-way roads, this is pretty typical of the road system. There's no sidewalks, lots of on-street parking, so there's really no pedestrian safety. There's very limited street lights. I'd say lack of one, but of course there's one right there in the picture. But there's not much in the way of street lights. And there's no community gathering spaces of any kind in the neighborhood. Across the street with the schools, there's quite a lot of opportunity. But for younger kids crossing Buckley, even though there are marked sidewalks. There's a lot of traffic and it's very challenging for younger children to get across the street there. So the public process that we've had so far, we did a web page and a mail out to residents that this planning process was starting up. We had a very big response considering the side of the neighborhood. We got 85 responses to the survey, and we had about 40 people attend an open house in May. So the messages from the survey results, which I'm pretty sure I attached to your report, we had a split message between the newer and longer term residents, or split responses, kind of evenly split between people who lived there 5 years or more and less than 5 years. Most of the people we heard from were homeowners, and reading between the lines in the comments, I think most of the people we heard from were the single-family residents. I'd say that was the majority of people really kind of concerned about what might be going on. The main issues, definitely number one, was lack of sidewalks and the chaotic parking, speeding and traffic through the neighborhood, need for parks or public space internally within the neighborhood, the school crossing, and concern about changes in density. So there was very lukewarm support for apartments in the future and townhouses. This is despite the multifamily zoning that's already in place there. There was some support for additional density. People liked the idea of clustered houses, kind of smaller scale density. The majority supported 3 stories as an upper limit and not much support for anything higher than that. We floated the idea of putting in a sidewalk, which is on one side as the road loops through the neighborhood, and there was definitely good support for that. We also looked at the potential for a rear walkway, and there was kind of cautious support for that, and I'll talk about that a bit further. It's probably something we're not going to be able to achieve. So the amenities for the neighborhood really fall in line with those comments. People first and foremost are looking for sidewalk and pedestrian safety and improvements to their road. So just looking briefly at the OCP, I've kind of circled the neighborhood. Wilson Crescent is kind of a sub-part of the broader Dentville area, which is a neighborhood that's been identified as an area in need of a neighborhood plan. As Jonas mentioned, this Wilson Crescent area is proceeding separately because it's kind of geographically separate from the other areas and because of the development pressure. So the residential designation is one that supports additional density, mix of housing forms, and increasing the proportion and range of multifamily housing. It is intended to accommodate growth. So the current zoning is kind of an interesting mixed bag. The RM1 zone is the low-density multifamily zone that really only exists here and in one other location in the district, I believe in Valley Cliff. The RM2 zoning applies to a couple of properties that currently have apartments and townhouses, and the RM3 zone applies at the north end to an older apartment site. But many of the properties within this RM1 zone, which is where most of the development pressure currently is, are currently used for single family. So just quickly looking at the density and heights, in that RM1 zone, which is probably what we're focusing on, it's a fairly low density of 0.6 floor area ratio. It's a notch above single family, and especially as the district gets into additional units in your single family neighborhood, like laneway houses and so on, that 0.6 looks low, and most of the developers who've submitted pre-applications are looking for something beyond that. The RM2 zone at 0.8 and the RM3 zone, the apartment zone, is at 1.0. There's a few single family lots that rezoned not too long ago. There's 2 here and 3 here that for some reason aren't colored properly, but there are these 5 properties that rezoned to single family in the not too distant future, or past, pardon me. So it's kind of an unusual anomaly there. So just looking at how the units break out, the green color are the multifamily units. You can see there's a very large number of multifamily units compared to the single-family units. Those units, those 5 parcels, 5 of them contain rental housing. They're not strata. So it accounts for half the homes in the area. 160 of them are currently rental housing, which is, as you know, a really important aspect of Squamish, that you're short on rental housing. So preserving this rental stock is definitely a big part of the thinking here. Some of those older multifamily properties, RM1 and RM2, are built at quite a low density by today's standards. So there is potential on some of those properties to, just going back to the RM2 and 3 zones, some of those may come in, they're older properties, they may come in looking for additional density too. So the OCP does have a replacement rental housing policy, no net loss of existing housing, and a 1-to-1 replacement of units is kind of the basic starting point of the rental housing. Just looking at the environmental conditions, this Wilson Slough and the Squamish Estuary further over to the east, or west, pardon me, I'm almost getting east and west mixed up, do influence this area and create some low-lying areas with a high water table, and the riparian area, which shows in kind of a grayish blue along the perimeter of the, this thing working? Around the perimeter of the area, there are designated development permit areas, so that will also influence the buildability of some of these sites. The Wilson Slough area, which we'll talk about a bit further as a potential area to put some public space in, it's a bit of a forgotten area, I guess. The people park all over the riparian area from the multifamily developments. There's a few grocery carts strewn along there. It's not in good condition, but it is all Crown land along here, so it is definitely an opportunity for the district to apply some community amenities and get possibly a trail through here and get some restoration of the riparian habitat. Flood hazard, as you might guess, affects this property. It's all in the floodplain. Some areas have additional limitations. They're designated as secondary floodway. The roads are all secondary floodways, which are meant to flood if the dike is overtopped. And a small area at the north, in that bottom slide, is in a conditional densification area, again reflecting a higher degree of flood hazard. So with any redevelopment, as in much of Squamish, these areas will need to be addressed, these limitations. I won't read through this, but the area is quite deficient in parts of its infrastructure. Water and sewer modeling are needed for any new development, and stormwater management planning. The district has identified this as a first priority of their integrated stormwater management plan. So there is proposed to be some municipal updates to the infrastructure to improve fire flows and to start looking at stormwater. So we've been kind of wrestling with what to do with this neighborhood as we go through this process and hear from the community. So we put 3 options on the table just to get our thinking going. We did meet with council at the committee of the whole a couple of days ago and went through these same options. So it'll be interesting to hear from the design panel. So option 1 would be to retain the current process, which means that anybody who wants to go above the existing zone density would come in with a site-specific rezoning application. The advantage to that is everybody gets a say on what could happen. I guess the downside to that is there's a lot of process involved in going through all of these individual applications. And that's something we certainly hear from the development industry. It's just the time involved in all of this. Option 2 is looking at expanding the infill options. Right now in the RM1 and RM2 zones, you can only do townhouses and not much else. You can't do any of the infill types that are permitted in some of the single-family zones. So you can do duplexes already. But some of these other options, like laneway houses, cottages, might allow you to retain the existing single-family home. And one of the things along with this option that we're going to explore as the City of Vancouver goes down this road is looking at whether strata titling could be allowed for the new units, and whether that might be an incentive for someone to keep their home and reuse the property a bit more intensively is what option 2 is about. So option 3 is looking at a new neighborhood zone with a density bonus structure that allows for an additional floor area. We would still incorporate the infill options from option 2, but we would allow apartments and townhouses in all of these zones and structure a bylaw that allows for a density bonus for rental housing units, possibly for providing mini parks at the street edge, doing streetscape improvements beyond your parcel frontage, doing a larger area of that sidewalk and road upgrade that's needed, completing a broader servicing analysis for the area, and trail construction, habitat restoration at Wilson Slough. So we haven't got a structure together yet to how this might look. Certain of the things on that list are probably more valuable than others, so we haven't refined this list yet, but I think that's the basic direction that, and as we put together this report and went to council, this was the preferred option that Jonas and I thought, and I guess one of the pluses of option 3 is that you're more proactive, I guess, in facilitating new development. Now, from the procedural point of view, there's advantage to that because everybody would just need to go through a development permit process rather than a rezoning. But from the neighborhood perspective, they wouldn't have a say to the same degree they do if you go through individual rezonings. So there's positives and negatives to that. So just looking, these are just kind of guessing at numbers at this point, but what our original thoughts were is going up to 0.75 if you're doing infill housing, going up to somewhere in the range of 0.8 to 1 if you're doing duplexes and townhouses, and for apartments maybe going up to even 1.4 FAR, which is a big jump from the current. So these are numbers that we're just kind of playing with at this point, but one of the messages we did hear from council was that in the RM1 portion of this neighborhood, quite a few council members didn't feel that height is appropriate here, that it belongs downtown, and that to kind of keep this, even though there's support for redevelopment here, the importance of scale here is really foremost in their thinking. So just looking at a couple of examples that we had looked at, in this neighborhood, on the right-hand side here, the Arbutus Grove development went up quite recently on Buckley Avenue. It built within the RM1 zone. It just came in under that 0.6 FAR, and it meets the height of 10.68. So it's 2 stories above ground level parking, and it's got these kind of roof patios on top. The Current, which is on the south arm of Wilson Crescent, closer to downtown, I'm sure many of you have seen it, also came in at the 0.6 FAR, but with a lower height at 9.5 meters. And just for comparison, we're looking at the Breeze as a density of 0.9, but a fairly modest height increase, 11.9 meters. And one of the concepts we looked at from a pre-application was a smaller, it doesn't look too small on this, but it's only covering 2 lots in the neighborhood. So the lower right-hand side is a 3-story apartment with underground parking, which takes it to 1.3, maybe even 1.4 floor area ratio. So I guess the interesting thing about this is the apartment structure gives a lot of different opportunities for living, for 1-story living without stairs. So that is of interest, just to have the variety of housing stock. So I think that's kind of it. I'll maybe just go put a map back up on the screen so we can have that in front of us as we talk.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll start with the zoning map maybe, or maybe the air photo might be better.
Okay, thanks. How do you want to do usual questions?
Yeah, we could follow kind of the usual path, questions and then discussion.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone want to start with questions?
Just for clarity. Susan, you talked about option one. I don't know if I quite heard you right. You said that the developer finds it cumbersome because the status quo is because I didn't quite get
Well,
that.
the rezoning process is a bunch of extra steps for any development. They have to come in and make an application.
Also, it was the rezoning.
Yeah, the rezoning aspect of going, under option one, individual owners would still have the ability to come in and rezone, whereas in option three, we're looking at putting a new zone together that is structured so that there's opportunity for bonus density already built in. They wouldn't have to necessarily go through a rezoning. But yes, we definitely hear from individual developers about the rezoning process being time-consuming and it has a fair bit of public input involved.
Dwayne, do you have any questions?
Just a couple on the, was it important to mention the trail construction, habitat restoration, and dedications in there? Could that not be done through like a CAC process? Is it important to mention it? I guess that's my only question.
Well, and maybe I should clarify that. One of the issues when you've got a pre-zoned neighborhood is that the CACs don't apply in the same way. The CAC bylaw is structured so that it's only when you have an increase in density that it kicks in. So all of this neighborhood, because it's pre-zoned, the district doesn't have the opportunity to get CACs in the same way. Only if somebody comes in wanting to do higher density, and then only the change in density is CAC eligible. So yes, we're looking at ways of getting some amenities other than the CAC dollars. And I guess the other part of that is the CAC dollars often just go into a fund. There's some deficiencies directly in the neighborhood, and we're trying to get return directly to the neighborhood. I forgot to mention the rare trail, if I could just kind of go back to the terrible time finding my way backwards and forwards here. Hang on here, just go to the air photo. We originally thought there might be an opportunity to run a rear trail. These are long lots here and long lots here that front on the looped road that goes around. We thought there might be opportunity to, over the long term, run a rear trail down through here. But as we look more carefully at the existing development and the condition of the houses that are there, it's almost impossible. So Yanis and I have been working on a mid-block trail that might be possible in one or two locations. And in fact, that might actually be a better outcome for the neighborhood to break up this. This is a very long block. People have to walk all the way around each time they want to go anywhere. So the mid-block crossing is probably a better outcome, and there are one or possibly two opportunities to do that given the, kind of looking at the condition of the houses and what is likely to redevelop in the next 5 years or so. So that's probably what we're going to identify as a neighborhood amenity, in addition to the Wilson Slough.
Squamish, is it, you have the step code's in place. What level do you know what the building department's description of
I can skip that. It's coming in July, and so Part 9 buildings like townhouses would go to step 3 by 2019. I think we started step 2 this year, and then 2019 to step 3, and then it stays there till 2021. and part 3 buildings would go to step 3, 2021.
And is there any incentive to adding to your list of saying, well, you want adaptable or accessible type dwellings? Is that something that you
That
do?
would be a good addition. You know, we're just making this list up right now, and
We usually secure those through the rezoning process, but because we're looking at one of the options, pre-zoning it, I think that's a valid, that would be a valid density bonus type of
So
capture.
the sustainability might take care of itself through the step
Yeah.
out.
Yes.
Good, right? So you have
Yeah.
trees.
yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be a good addition to the density bonus.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an opportunity to look at, I mean, it's a bit of a step forward, but with visitability, so looking at, whether or not there's going to have garages, if it's going to be a cottage, that you drive into the garage and you would be able to have level entrance from the garage, so you would still have steps on one side, but the building have, and then you can get basic access into your home, right? Into the doors,
Yeah, the flood construction level is always
Yeah.
an issue for living space to be.
But if there's a laneway that's on the back, that's built up, then you're removing the necessity to ramp into the house, right?
No, I don't think there will be a laneway along the back. I guess we did look at this as either a laneway for vehicles or for pedestrians, and I guess the vehicle use of this rear area, I was really hoping we could achieve a proper rear lane there, because it would have made such a difference to the access for units, getting the cars off the street, all kinds of things. But unfortunately, engineering-wise, there's well, first of all, it would be about 20 years or more before it could actually go right through. But in the short term, the fire department wouldn't be happy with a dead-end partial lane. But the bigger problem is the fact that there's an intersection here and an intersection here, and a lot of traffic from the school, and the spacing is just too close from an engineering point of view for an arterial road to have a third point of intersection. So that pretty much kiboshed that idea, even though there were many planning reasons that we would want to have it. It's just too dangerous, I guess, was the kind of the determination. So that's when so I think we won't be having a rear lane. I think that's pretty clear. The units, like the current has done, you will have a driveway off the main road.
To that point, just to that point, the rear lane could still work if you got to where those single-family homes were and then went south. You'd have to turn it down. No,
You'd have to come out through a property here.
right there. Like if you brought that weird, not right down to government or what it is, but if you wanted
If you
to veer
started
that
it
way,
here
Yeah.
you
and
could
went up.
come as just as pedestrian, keeping people off the sidewalk. Just a thought.
Unfortunately, because of the shape of these long, narrow properties, it just uses up a lot of somebody's land, and how to allocate that, the whole neighborhood benefits, but one of these properties would have to
Take the hit.
take the hit, yeah.
Could it not be a
Or
right out?
actually-
Could it not be just a right out only onto the main street? As in a one-way that comes up and just exits?
From a future lane?
Yeah.
How would you get in there then?
Going around.
Oh, I see,
coming the
yeah.
other way. And then the fire truck could always, go either way in the case of a fire.
Can you show me how to zoom in on this airfield?
Yeah.
Can you turn that front light out too, so we can see the map better?
It's better.
Yeah,
That's as much as it'll go.
Part of the problem is the existing development. We've got a townhouse development here. There's no space to take the lane out at the back end. And This building is extremely close to the rear property line, and that's not going anywhere soon. And the bigger problem is the fact that the Arbutus Grove development is built really tight to its back lane. So even if we were to take the rear lane off these properties, these are not all developing right away. Having said that, even though things aren't going to happen right away, you still would take it. But there's this corner little lot here that you would end up taking most of that property away in order to run the lane on this side. But again, all of these lines end up at kind of an oblique angle with, and that's the problem with the intersections of Wilson Crescent. They're already there. They don't just come out on a busy road, they come out on an angle to a busy road, and there's already two, and I guess the engineering department really does not want to see a third point there on an arterial road. If this was just a local street, it would be quite different, but the traffic is, it's busy. So we haven't given up on the idea of a portion of a lane, and if there could be some consolidations that would make this happen. It's still not a bad idea, even if it comes out here, because there's just so much advantage to accessing from the back. But so far, we don't have anything in front of us that would achieve that. And the end parts down here, you've got some better quality houses that aren't going to come forward right away. So it's it's the biggest issue here is you've just got this mix of uses, and it's not a perfect scenario like you've got a big chunk of raw land. But the pathway this way at some point looks achievable and really helps the pedestrian flow through the neighborhood instead of having to go all the way around that long walk.
I think because if you abandon the laneway and look at the trail, I think the trail can still work down the middle even if it's part way. So you can kind of have a T that, a trail running north to south and then extending down to Buckley down the middle.
Yeah.
Because you need a lot less room for a trail.
Yeah, I know we're in question period, but the temptations for solutions are coming out.
Yeah, that's
It
already
might be a
merged
combination
together.
of the two. It might be
Yeah.
a Z, right?
It
might
could
be in, down a bit, and out, and that would achieve both of what you're looking for. I mean, when the Arbutus came, I thought, oh man, are we going to get 10 of these applications, and everybody's doing a driveway all the way down to the back? Because if you overlay that amount of driveway on every lot,
It's
the
huge.
amount of land you'd have to give over would far exceed what a developer or even a homeowner would have to give up. And maybe for the single family lots, now you offer them a bonus density if their lot changes over for that lane easement or a trail easement. Because I think, unless you can start implementing some real changes to circulation here and adding some meaningful park space, there's no point in adding density if you can't add density in park space too.
What we're looking at for park space, I didn't bring any examples, I should have, to the ADP, but is with some of these development applications, rather than them providing internal play areas to serve their residents, we're looking at reorienting their open space toward the street so that you get a nice landscaped area with benches, probably with a covenant to make sure it remains publicly accessible, and grouping them together where we can so that at the street edge we have these little parkettes that instead of hiding the open space at the back of the multifamily sites. But the point about driveways, they chew up. I mean, if you look at the current site, it's pretty much pavement.
Yeah.
So I think that's the risk with not doing anything about it, is that all of those lots are going to turn into that, because the Arbutus was able to do that, and they're all, they're slightly smaller but similar size.
You have to fit the parking to meet the density, right? So you can fit that many units, so you've got to get that number of cars on site unless there's a different parking strategy.
Yeah.
But the Arbutus probably gave up a third of their land for driveway and parking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have to give up a quarter if you gave
pave over laneway at the back, right?
Yeah, but to redevelop, you still have to fit cars on site for
But then they
parking.
still plug in from both directions.
Well,
everything,
if
yeah.
you allow for
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. What's the possibility, as a question, like the peak, the point, the upper point, the north end, which is floodplain, I mean, if, that's all in private ownership, right? So you couldn't, I mean, if you were doing this logically and it was all under one ownership, you'd say, okay, the north end's too awkward to develop, it's too narrow, it's floodplain, there's a big chunk of park. But right now, it's under one ownership?
It's all privately owned, yeah.
Yeah, so
Parking
you
lot.
can't do any big moves as long as it's under private ownership unless the incentives are significant.
Yeah, or unless you have the capital to purchase those and make it district infrastructure.
Oh.
Because it would make sense as a counterbalance to school, which is a big open space for teenagers, maybe, you know, a floodplain and an awkward point would make a really good kind of family park.
And I think, at some point, these multifamilies, bigger sites like at the north end will probably come in for redevelopment. They're not there yet, but that is definitely, I'm less concerned about those because they're big and they'll want to do something different at some point, and then, yes, you get your open space areas and make sure they're publicly accessible. I mean, I think that north site is they're not going to be able to use the farthest reaches of that site. I think that's more achievable. The more difficult part is just what to do in these central areas, through here, where what we're seeing is property consolidations happening. And I don't want to suggest that the current is a bad development, but it does have, that effect of, first of all, it's a big change when you get, and I guess that's one of the policies that Jonas and I are tossing around is, should there be a limit on property size, like kind of a maximum, so you don't get, maybe you shouldn't consolidate more than 2 or 3 at a time. And,
What is the FCL height, roughly? Above grade, is it a story close to?
I think it's a story. If you look at the current and the Arbutus, they both met the modern FCL.
Yeah,
What it would be close to today's FCL.
because that really affects discussions of lots of things.
It
Pretty
does.
quick, whether we want them or not. You either have to do a site exemption, and maybe there is for accessible units, or infill, and because that's helpful to take something else for developers out of the process of the unknown, right? So that would be interesting. Another question I had is what are the front yard setbacks right now? They're generally 20 feet or something like this in all those RM zones.
I had a table with this.
I think it's around 7 meters.
Yeah.
They're mostly 7.5, 7.6 for the RM1 zone. Yeah, they're all 7.6 for the front.
We're sticking to questions. Can I keep asking?
Yeah.
Get them out.
Yeah.
It'll help the conversation, I think. Can you leverage not only infrastructural upgrades, but things like parks in the servicing agreement? If you miss that opportunity in the rezoning or a CAC grab or an amenity grab, can there be mandatory ones in the servicing part?
No, not unless there's a subdivision, right? Otherwise, I don't believe so, in terms of land.
Okay. And there's no district-owned land in this
No.
zone, just across the street, that one you're considering for?
That's right, so the street, across the street side, which is that green side with the skate park on, the northwest corner of that side will be a park. We've got budget for it, and we're just waiting to see what happens with the affordable housing project that's going also potentially on that site. But there is money put aside, so there will be a neighborhood park there.
So can you
Can you note that
Yeah.
location?
by the skate park
Is it this
there?
thing where you zoom into?
38648.
It'll probably be right here.
Okay.
And it's not going to be huge, but it will be an activated park.
There's really good park for adults and kind of older children, with the school sites and that future park. It's just, lacking anything directly within the neighborhood, especially for younger children, just visually too.
Would you consider a zoning for this neighborhood that's not like RM 1 or 2? Could you make a new zone for it? So,
That's,
because then that ties into the front yard setback, could we get some street width or park space by decreasing the front yard and going to a more urban typology for housing? Even like I was in San Francisco, it was totally different than we have here, but every zero lot line, townhouse, row house, and they all had parking at the front. And it was a different streetscape, but that's how they got the width. So you give up some garden for public space.
That's really up for grabs, not opposed to that at all. Like to say have a more urban kind of street orientation here would be fantastic.
Maybe not everywhere,
But the problem is just those long, narrow lots. To get your units through those long, narrow lots, you end up doing kind of the Arbutus Grove just to,
That's why I kind of feel like density could help you here, but you're really relying on a much larger building to the point where underground is reasonable, and then you can free up some of the space around the building. Because if you go too small, then you're back into that situation. If you go smaller again, then you're
You'll only get underground on an apartment typology, right?
Exactly.
But you can't have residential below the floodplain, so then
Yeah, so you
you're
have
not
to
really underground,
It
you're
has to be
building a
big
podium.
enough that they could.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so you're not gonna get it.
And I think when these other RM2 and RM3 zones redevelop, some of these are older buildings, I think we'll get that. I think nobody's kind of opposed to additional height. Where the height sensitivity comes in, again, this is the Loop Road, Wilson Crescent. These people have fairly nice views, aside from living on kind of almost a rural environment on their single-family homes. Their views are off in this direction. And so I think we can achieve, quite a bit of additional density here in the future and on this site possibly as well. But, people's view corridors through here is something we definitely heard about in the public. There's a limited appetite for additional density and height, even though that is the solution to a lot of problems. Definitely going underground with your parking. Having a common parking area, you can bring your parking standards down. It solves a number of problems when you've got that shared parking environment. But the developers, it's not cost effective until you get, into some real density. That's the problem.
And you still have that floodplain, so you can't.
Yeah.
It's not like you can do underground and then have ground accessible units.
Essentially, your underground is your first floor.
Yeah,
It's
so-
not technically underground. It's more like
Yeah.
a slope up
And
to
on the
it.
Mamcram channel, you kind of get away with it because you can hide it a bit.
Right.
Right?
If there's a slope, you can hide it
But here, I
too.
don't think, on a big site maybe.
Have they also looked at like the maximum amount of volume, like those roads going in and out of what is it, Government Road there?
Buckley.
Buckley, yeah. How much it can actually handle? Because if you increase the density too much, then you're just creating major traffic issues at that.
We haven't done a traffic impact assessment here, and again, that's part of the challenge. When you've got a big single developer, you can send them away to do all those studies.
Right.
When you've got a lot of really small scale developers, you can't do that, so we have to rely on the staff to use their judgment, and certainly we've heard from the neighborhood about the difficulty. They have a lot of difficulty getting out of both the north and south entrance of Buckley because of the speed and volume of traffic. So I don't, every time we do a traffic study, it comes back telling you that the roads can handle. I've never seen a traffic study that doesn't come back saying the roads can handle the volume. I'm not so concerned about volume as sight lines. There's a number of things the district can be contributing to here in terms of infrastructure improvements, and that's definitely something we heard from council a couple of days ago, is that the district has underinvested here, and that it shouldn't all be on the smaller developers to fix all the problems.
What's the width of the road at the moment?
It varies. It's slightly more than one. It varies all through the neighborhood, and I think it varies from about 10 to about 12 to 14 meters in its widest.
So it's called right away.
Yes.
So there is some capacity for sidewalks and such if you
We-
maintain this
we-
single.
Yes, there's capacity to do sidewalk one side. It would have to stay being one lane, one way loop, but there's capacity to put a sidewalk one side, parking the other with kind of pods of parking, and that's achievable. It's tighter in some spots than others, but rather than the kind of streetscape we see with the cars all over the place, there is actually room, even with the current road allowance, to get that And unfortunately, when the current went ahead, they did actually move their buildings closer to the street. They were given a variance. But they were also not required to put a sidewalk in. They put a painted line on one side of the street, and that's something that today the staff are just kind of rolling their eyes saying, we really lost that opportunity. So that's one section of road, where we're offering developers, potentially in a new bylaw, offering developers a bonus density. Providing additional sections of street frontage is one of the things to kind of pick up some of these deficiencies.
Where's that property you just mentioned?
It's the current, this one. When it was developed, they brought the building right close to the street and did some kind of stormwater management landscaping on the frontage, and then on the other side of the street they put a painted line. And this, today, I don't think that would happen. I think it would be a proper sidewalk. But nobody had looked comprehensively at the neighborhood, and that's part of the reason we're doing this, is to kind of make sure those things are, there's a list of what's needed.
But for a one-way street, the street section's adequate.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's more than adequate. It's just not well used. People.
Has a certain amount of chaos to it, but
Yeah.
actually, you know what, I kind of like it. I like the feel of the neighborhood. I don't know, it's kind of weird. So I was curious that we're talking about widening streets when all the time we're trying to bring streets down in width. So I don't know if you want to create a standard residential street that you find in the other neighborhood.
No, I don't think this would ever be a standard street just because the right-of-way width isn't there, but to kind of create pedestrian safety is the goal, given the width that you've got, is to prioritize pedestrians over random parking. Yes.
So on a question, would the district be open to giving up land, well, maybe the school district, or improving Buckley in a big way, and like you could do roundabouts? I mean, it's a school zone anyway, so you got to really slow that street down, and it's only slowed down by signage. It's not slowed down by any geometry. It's not slowed down by any sensitive streetscaping, right? So you could have, whether the medians, so the kids can cross the road one direction at a time, you can have roundabouts at some of these intersections. So that would, I think, go a long way to improving the exterior safety of the project.
Yeah.
And Buckley's a significant street, so I think it warrants a significant investment over the long term. But I think, well, no, it's not. I'm trying to take questions, it's not working.
I've got a question. You're talking about is it north-south kind of pedestrian corridor, so you don't have to loop around the whole thing. Is there ability to improve that parks, or is that a school? It's a Montessori school just north there?
Yes, it is.
They would really benefit from an improved park behind there. It's like almost a no-go zone, as I understand. It'd be nice to have like a throughway there, but then a pedestrian bridge over the slough there, and then that is the park space there that the Montessori school kids could also use there, like an append dog corral in there in a wet zone. It'd be nice to have a whole park in there for small children that you jump over the slough with a pedestrian bridge. Is that opportunity? Is that district land or no? It's
No,
not.
I think that land is owned by the church.
The church, yeah, you can just see the property lines here. That's private property belonging to the church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then it's crown land all along here. So we're looking at the crown land as the opportunity to do something in terms of habitat improvement and trail.
Right.
But the church, but to be honest, the church, the rest of the riparian corridor comes along here, and I think there's certainly opportunity to try and work with them to continue the improvements right through. They can't use that for anything else.
But they could sell that at any time.
Yeah, it could be a development site. If that were the case, you would still look for that continuity and habitat improvements with any new development there.
Is the municipality in a position to buy strategic pieces, get the circulation links that they need, and then release those remnants at a higher density and recoup?
That's not our business model. It's buying, upzoning,
It's too
and
visionary.
selling. We've gone through this process.
Yeah.
and we have, in terms of purchasing new property, we've got a lot of critical amenities that we're missing and critical pieces of infrastructure that's just not the focus.
Unfortunately.
Okay.
Unfortunately. So, all those long, skinny lots, well, I know that's the focus of this. And it's because the planning department's getting people coming in saying, yeah, I'm gonna amalgamate 2, or I'm gonna try and amalgamate 3. Is that right?
Yes.
That's because, so people are coming in and they're saying, yeah, we wanna amalgamate our lots. And I actually know people that live on that street that are being pressured by their neighbors or pressuring their neighbors to jump on this. So, the planning department, in its wisdom, set up this little area. And what did you call it? It's a
Microplan.
microplan, which I think is genius because it kind of slows everyone down on that. So I commend the planning department for that big time. It's the first one I've ever seen. But I thought you'd be encouraging the amalgamations.
We are.
So if we're encouraging the amalgamations, then I think it's wise to draw your trail network where you want it. And then
And those are amalgamations that aren't going for rezoning, right?
That's right.
So they don't need to give up anything.
you plan your trail network. And I know you can't demand things from stuff, but if you go to it, I thought another thing that was interesting was the ways that you were getting the amenities up there.
Well, that's why we're aiming for the density bonus structure, because
Yeah.
we don't have opportunity to get anything under the
Did
current
you go to
zoning.
that page though? It
Yep.
showed that ways you were gonna do it.
Yeah. I can't get out of this to
And so council's kind of all over the map on this.
Yeah.
We're not focused on A, B, or C. It's like 2 or A, 2 or B, and 2 or C.
well, internally, we're having quite a few discussions too. It's actually not a straightforward situation,
See,
but
see, rental housing units, parkettes, because there's parking issues on that narrow street. And by the way, I really fought for a sidewalk in front of that development there. Streetscape improvements beyond parcel frontage, that's trails, right? No?
trails are at the very bottom, the dedication of the rail walkway, or whether it's a
Okay.
north-south.
Yeah, well, I thought
walkway.
streetscape improvements would also do
Yeah.
that. Completion of service analysis, there's your sidewalks and drug. So anyway, I thought that was,
Well, I think it would work, the last thing we want to see is each individual lots get developed. I think 2 or 3 lot amalgamations could probably work really well, and maybe you could get the open space being shared, if there's 2 lots here amalgamating and 3 lots here, you share the space in the middle to provide kind of a linear park. That's how you would get your park space in.
But that's in the RM zone, because you're thinking it's town. But
No, I think we're.
Whatever.
Option 3 would probably be a CD zone.
Right, no, but that's what you're trying to avoid is the individual lots with the long driveways, like
Yeah.
across the.
Yeah.
Because Vancouver just started discussing the RS and RT zones doing more of the infill, so that's why I like number 3, because then you can do duplex, triplex, quad.
Yeah.
It allows a
But
single
infill.
lot to do infill,
Yeah,
yes.
so I think to Ted's point of people who don't want to pressure, they still have an ability to densify, but they don't need that to do that drive aisle. And that might then require you to think about a parking strategy for those types of infills that isn't, 1 per bedroom or whatever it is in that zone. And then I think it supports the rental housing really great, because you could have 2 coach houses on your property or a duplex and a nanny suite.
Yeah.
The challenge with the
SDL
infill on
proposal.
those long, narrow lots is you still need to get to the back of those lots, and
Yeah.
you're still gonna need some kind of driveway that the fire department's happy with. And that's kind of the challenge in how you still end up with pavement.
How wide are they generally? Like,
Well, the fire department looks for 6
6
meters.
no, the
On the
parcels.
lots?
Typical lot.
I don't have that in front of me.
Not hundreds.
No.
60s, 50s, pretty.
No, they're wider than that. They're like in the I'm thinking the 75. They're definitely much wider than a City of Vancouver lot, and much longer. A lot of them are quarter acre in size. I just don't have the dimensions with me. Why not right now?
the only way you're gonna get what you want is to offer more in exchange. Otherwise, you're just tinkering, right? And maybe, I mean, status quo might be better than something in the middle.
Yeah, or not, that's what they're not densifying,
Yeah.
or they say densifying everywhere. The fire is a tricky one. Is there some strategy around that with fire hydrants placed along the rear trail, the rear lane kind of somehow?
Well, we don't have a rear lane, you
No,
know.
but if you were
that's-
to introduce one, it might not be a drive aisle for the
Oh,
fire
if there
truck.
were a rear lane, that would change everything, but you know, I'm just cautious about thinking about that rear lane because there's obstacles in the way. When we've looked at it, it's gonna be really tricky to ever achieve that, so I'm not working on the premise of a rear lane. My ideal would have to be a rear lane, it would just help so many things, but there's hurdles, buildings in the way.
How many applications are these? Is there several applications?
There's two formal applications have been submitted and 6 pre-apps that,
6 pre-apps.
yeah.
To do something similar to the other one?
Yeah, yes, townhouses and apartments, you know, they're definitely looking at density and,
As a rezoning.
yes, yes.
It is, so a developer could come in and try to purchase everything. Is that?
They could, but I,
Right.
yeah, I don't
Should
see
be done
that.
at the rezoning at this stage.
I just, you know, there,
That's what I thought, you got 3 or 4 big buildings, lots of space in between.
I colored up a map just for my own
Change that
use
whole-
and, you know, there's,
Yeah, I know, that's me.
well, you know, the neighborhood has a bunch of keepers, you know, in terms of single family. There's newer ones and there's older homes in really good shape, you know, so it's not, I certainly don't see everybody at the same time saying I want to sell. But, you know, as the neighborhood gets more multifamily, those people possibly will change their mind. But there's houses in really good condition and the older little houses that people have paid for, you know, they may not want to go anywhere. Like they've got a nice big rural type lot, you know, so it's really a challenge here.
So it's a
but-
mixed bag. It's right.
And, you know, as you mentioned, it's a neat little neighborhood like to live in because of that kind of rural quality. And council mentioned yesterday that they feel, a couple of council members mentioned that they feel it's already got a nice mix of multi and single, you know. Maybe this is the perfect neighborhood. But people looking at developing really feel that 0.6 FAR is too low. And partly because you're not buying raw land, you're buying houses, you know, built properties that is more expensive than just buying raw land.
And there's enough start from scratch neighborhoods now in Squamish that, you know, this one is kind of quirky and it's got its own character. I'd be reluctant to kind of broad brush paint it. Maybe let it be ad hoc and continue with a kind of different character.
It's harder to get continuity though in the
Yeah.
rezoning every time, and like from the developer side, it's like a year of unknown and public consultation, the public gets burnt out a bit after so many applications, and I think you lose the ability to get the infrastructure right, so.
Now, one thing
And
about
those 20 Arbutus is probably wouldn't be that great,
Oh.
right?
No, I wish the fire wasn't such an issue for like a little cottage infill type
Yeah.
thing, so I'm.
Well, we haven't run that past them yet, but you know, the reason the city of Vancouver can do this stuff so well is because of the lanes, you know, they've just got grid system
Well, that's where
lanes.
that north-south, or the north-south 2 lanes could be really interesting. And have you thought about then allowing subdivision of the long lots into 2 shorter lots along those lanes or something, so you could get some dense, you know, sub-streets
Well, that's,
with smaller front yard setbacks and fire access or
that's
something.
good. Just going to the zoning map, one of those properties in particular that doesn't show up unfortunately,
Yes,
didn't get colored, but this lot down here, which happens to run, the road runs this way, just because of its long configuration against the road. They subdivided into 3 small lots there, so they're quite small, these lots, under the RS3 zone. I think it's a 250 square meter size. But with the rest of the properties, they're not sitting sideways to the street. And so, yes, you'd have to introduce a strata. But I guess what we hear from the developers, although from the planning point of view, we like the idea of these infill housing types, the developers don't see the yield that they want to get on those housing types. I don't know that there's going to be much appetite for that amongst the developers. I think an individual homeowner
Yeah.
might be interested
Yeah.
as a way to keep their house, and if we can find a way of it being strata titled, you know, that is an interesting option for affordability.
Because we don't have any say if someone wants to amalgamate, right? We
Well,
can't
you-
stop
You
amalgamations.
can, if it's in the zoning bylaw, like in like 2, you can only amalgamate 2 lots.
We could have a maximum parcel size.
So I think that was a good control. So the big lots, let them be the apartment typology with underground parking and get the density. And that was my other question, was how then do you incentivize density without just increased height? So the front yard was one I was curious, you know, can you give them
Yeah.
more site coverage, or can we exclude other elements out of the FAR calculation? Like whether it's 3-sided terraces or something to the definitions that they can still do good housing but get more density, more unit than like interior square footage? Or is it you can exclude all exterior walls? Something to be creative about a way without going to the, what was the height? I think it was 15 meters or something? I think it was 15, the bonus height.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
That was a suggestion, and again,
Yeah.
you know, those are just numbers we kind of put up there to get the discussion going.
Yeah,
right?
but
You
what's
know.
the counterpoint? Could
Yeah.
it be, could you get them density in another way?
So I think that height, probably at the very north end of the, you know, the north 1/3 of this neighborhood, the higher heights are achievable, but I think in the front 2/3 where it's RM1, you know, I don't know that, you know, that height is going to work too well on an individual parcel basis.
Like a 3-story walk-up in Vancouver, if there's a floodplain lift, you're not too far off that.
But they've got underground parking, right?
Yeah, so that's why
They've
the
got
parking has to, if you
Yeah.
really did a relaxation and you go 100% rental housing, walk up and a relaxation of the floodplain and reduced parking, all of a sudden you're gonna get people doing apartments on those long skinny lots. Maybe. It's a big jump from what we're used to, and parking is always the discussion, but if you want affordable rental, that's how you get it.
But the flip side of that is trying to keep a scale in this neighborhood that's workable. You know, we don't want a huge, long, single slab of apartment either, you
Site
know. We
coverage, yeah.
kind of want somebody to break up the buildings and,
Well, I've heard a few people say they like it the way it is.
yeah.
But
That,
I mean, if you've got people coming in saying, oh, I bought my neighbor's place and I'm not going to do lots, well, how do you keep it the way it is?
Yeah.
I think change is coming to this neighborhood,
Yeah.
whether people like it or not,
Yeah.
it's zoned for it. It's
Yeah.
been zoned for it for decades as a multi-family neighborhood.
Yeah.
So unless the district went and downzoned it to the single family or, you know, small density type of zoning, change is coming.
It's a great walkable neighborhood to downtown near the, like, it's a really neat little niche, so I think it's great going there. I hadn't been there much, and I went a couple months ago, and it was cute, with the little cedar fences and ditches. It had a nice change of scale. So, and then at the far end, there's all those older apartments, right? Isn't it?
Down zoning wasn't an option.
we didn't think of that.
No.
Nobody's ever asked for that.
Yeah.
Well, it affects people's land value pretty
Yeah,
good too.
it becomes a lawsuit.
So you,
Well, I mean, if you want what's there, you know, so
Yeah,
then
that's right.
skip that. It's not going to be the way it,
and
Well,
you have
that's
to
why
bring
we-
it's going to be the way it is.
Well, that's why we introduced the infill options, so that some of those better quality single-family properties have another choice, you know, because right now, you can't actually even build a single-family house under the RM1 zone. You're not permitted to do that. So, you know, allowing for 2, 3, whatever number of single dwellings on a property is one of the options we're looking at.
So the current zoning right now doesn't allow, say, a separate entrance suite in the back.
No,
No,
you can,
not RS.
Okay.
you can build a
Hmm.
townhouse or a duplex.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I guess your new zoning bylaw allows for a lock-off suite in any townhouse unit.
Yeah.
But these existing single-family homes are non-conforming under the current zoning because they're not permitted. So if you wanted to build if there was a vacant lot, there is actually one vacant lot that's really wet. If somebody wanted to build single-family, they could.
That lot is zoned RS4 or R4,
R4.
which does not exist in the zoning bylaws. They're an anomaly.
Bit of a mistake, yeah, it's up at the north end there, that extremely wet lot.
discussion now, pretty much, it seems.
Yeah.
I like the point of, I don't know if that was the intent, but allowing infill in the RT zones.
RM,
Like the RM, like you could have a coach house in a townhouse development, so you get a mix of small scale and, but you gotta really look at the existing setback allowances with that, but I looked at that at the, what's that neighborhood called, over by Townless Road?
Estates.
Yeah, Estates, and it was like a little 7 townhomes, it was under density what's allowable in the zoning, but it had a little coach house on the rear. It was kind of surprising, we weren't allowed to do it, but I thought it was an interesting mix, and in this type of neighborhood, maybe that's how you can get some more density or rental. So if that was your intent, I think that's a good thing to look at.
well, that under the
Number 3.
options 2 and 3 both allow for that.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense, you know, to bring that in. The problem with that is, you know, if you have a nice house and you decide to put a couple of other under this new zoning, and then either side of you goes into large townhouse buildings, you know, it's just it's challenging for people who live there to know what to do, you know, on their existing
But
properties.
the final outcome is hopefully a sidewalk, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's really needed there.
Yeah, definitely.
So whatever happens, we've got to try and extort a sidewalk out of whatever development goes in there.
I don't think we use that word, but
I mean, if there's one good thing about those long drive aisles is it's play space off the street at least.
Yeah.
Albeit they're too tight by the time everyone parks in their driveway,
Hockey.
but at least if there's some sort of incentive to amalgamate 2 lots and share a drive aisle, or could you go right through one lot, almost like a laneway all the way through, and one behind it would be great. So it acts like a lane.
well, you know, and again, it just goes back to the condition of the homes, you know, I've colored the map showing kind of the keepers and the non-keepers, and there's just is no easy way through this in terms of getting, you know, aligning a future trail or a future rear laneway. You know, it's just such an imperfect situation. We don't know when any of these parcels are going to come in. We know the ones that are interested now, but there's in between each of those, there are houses that, you know, look like they're going to stay. So I have not found a straight path for a trail or a rear lane at this point. Just kind of looking closely at what's on the ground, which doesn't mean you don't plan for it, but it may take 20 years, and so you can't provide access until it's done. So in the meanwhile, you're still doing long driveways off the main street. But those driveways could come with a covenant that says, you know, long term, this will provide public access. You know, there's certain things we could do, but only if people come in for a rezoning or if we set up a density bonus structure. We can't do anything under the current zoning in terms of getting anything extra. But under the current zoning, I should point out that if we do nothing and just keep the current zoning, you know, you still have individual zoning applications that allow you to negotiate things. And that's fairly likely that people are going to not want to work under the current zoning. So under option 1, instead of us trying to predict what amenities we want and building those into a density bonus, we can still have kind of policy that directs what the district will be looking for.
Or direct what they rezone to.
Yeah,
Which is much
yeah, we can
more
still do
difficult.
that. It's just that option 3 takes it a step further, kind of lays out the things we're looking for in a density bonus structure, so that the kind of the upper limit to density is established. The developers don't have to go through individual rezonings. That's probably the biggest, the biggest pro for option 3 is that it's a bit more proactive, takes people out of the rezoning application. But you know,
Maybe then the last point, the dedication of the rear walkway, that point should be dedication of a mid-block walkway or
yeah,
other, right?
Or
And
all
that just
sideways.
frees it up. 'Cause, I mean, if you do the rear one, everyone goes, doesn't work. Well, there is one that works. You know, it's probably a zig and a zag or a straight through, but there's
But at
one,
least there's
there's
some
one that works.
connectivity potential.
yeah.
What's that, master plan community in Amsterdam. Was that MDRDB did it, but it was a walkable. It had like a perimeter for the cars one way, but then internally it was this like labyrinth of pedestrian trails where all the kids played, and it was, I think it was about, the front yard was the, like you were suggesting, the parks, but there are no cars on them, so somehow they, I guess it's oriented the wrong way almost, it's those long, but I wonder if you could do that with the drive aisles, those become the drive, the strata roads become the parks or the lanes or something.
You still need your access to Buckley, you know, you still need a way in and out of the
Well,
neighborhood.
keep the main
Yeah.
loop, I think your main loop,
Yeah.
the one way is kind of quaint, that, we don't really have that in Squamish many places, and I
That's
got
the
lost
only
in
one.
there.
That's
but
the
it-
only option
no,
here.
But it was quite neat how it worked, other than there was a lot of parking on the street with big trucks. but-
Yeah.
And when you're playing in the street, you know which way to look before
Yeah.
you get hit.
Yeah.
There's the occasional person who goes the wrong way, which I did the first time I went there. I guess I'm used
Yeah,
to
I've
signs
seen that
that
every time.
say, do not enter, you know,
Yeah.
but instead there's just the symbol.
Or an arrow on the
And I kind of
street.
went flying past that thinking, I wonder what that was. It's people who use signs and people who use language, I guess. But, you know, I think there's a way to do the sidewalk design here ultimately that kind of keeps some character here. It doesn't need to look like a kind of suburban subdivision.
I think that incremental development and the zig and zag of the front yards would be really neat. Right, otherwise it's more lawn and stay off my space with the fence, and I know we saw that on like Arbutus development and the other one that didn't pass council. What was
Yes.
that one? So there was,
Next
they
door.
were private parks, but I think if they were public facing Buckley, it would,
Yeah.
you know, add some space for people to hang out and visual. So I think that could be a really
Yeah, if anybody was looking for density, you know, or even a variance, you know, those are things that you would try and negotiate
Yeah.
today. It was kind of that public, combined public-private space.
I think lower height, walkable, and a rental neighborhood would be a great thing to achieve.
The developers doing rental aren't going to want the lower height. You know, it's just not going to work for them cost-wise.
Do you know how many rental units we got under the works now?
In terms of in construction,
Well, approved.
approved at rezoning, so the rezoning approved, we have quite a few. It's still not going to meet the needs, the
100?
current needs.
Do we have 100?
Oh yeah, it's more than 100,
More than 100, so
more
that's
than 100.
purpose-built rentals.
Purpose-built rentals, but they're not going to, they're always kind of, we try to get them as close to the beginning of the project as possible, but they're never the first thing.
200?
Yeah, I think it's over 200. But so it'll take years before
Yeah.
those are built,
Mhm.
and it's all depending on the market too. If the market slows down, they just won't happen.
So the 160 units in this neighborhood are pretty important. You know.
Yeah.
Would the district do a site exemption for the whole neighborhood for FCL if everything below that was, say, rental? No.
I don't think so. No, I
How can
think
you do that?
flood protection is.
Well, you can get a site exemption.
And it floods and you get sued.
Well, they do it incrementally per lot on other parcels, like downtown. The whole downtown is.
Well, the
For
residential,
commercial.
you still have to, yeah, commercial is the only.
Oh, this isn't a
sacred
commercial
cow
zone.
downtown.
Otherwise, every redevelopment's gonna not be a pedestrian street frontage, so
Yeah.
it almost is better as it is because it's below floodplain,
You
so.
can't have laundry rooms downstairs.
Laundry, storage entries.
As long as it's not
Parking,
busy.
yeah.
Parking, but we can't have living, so then
There's no habitable.
every redevelopment becomes a
Higher.
car dominant street
Yeah.
and ground plane, so I just trying to be.
It's really hard with the flood construction levels, but you can't exempt residential from it. That's kind of the whole premise of the flood management plan, is to
Yeah,
keep people's places safe.
and there's no appetite for commercial in this,
I think that'll be interesting.
allow home office or
Oh,
office.
that's allowed anywhere, home offices.
But below the floodplain, it's this not really.
Oh, I see.
So I'm just trying to say, how could we, I thought the accessibility was one,
Oh, that's it, sorry.
doesn't work in any flood zones.
Well, it does in apartments, and that's an advantage
Yes.
of going to apartment
Yes,
structures,
yeah.
is the elevator.
Or you have elevators.
Everybody's looking. Hey, Siri.
Yes.
Well, I'll just move us on to the, we've got a lot of input, and I think as with our discussion with council and with Jonas and I internally,
That's something I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you go for 3? Okay. Are we done with questions? Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
Restart.
Yeah, okay. You can do comments? I'll start. I would say you're gonna get everything you want with 3. My vote would be 3, but we're not voting. Number 2 is great. You need to expand that so you do get those houses in the back. It's not allowed right now. Number 1 is you just, I don't think you get what you want. Number 1.
If I could just ask a question of you with supporting option 3, do you think there's a loss in not going through a rezoning application?
I think for big parcels, that was going to be one of mine. For
Okay.
big parcels, maybe there's a way to do rezoning over X acres or size. The small ones, I think it's really helpful because not big developers are going to be taking on those individual lots. So to take that expertise and time and uncertainty out of it, I think would be really good. You get landowners developing,
Yeah.
which I think is helpful.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And limit the number of bundles you can do. 3. That's my comment. Sure.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, actually. In the back of my head, I was thinking of if there were a hybrid between option 2 and option 3, and that almost nails it right there,
Yeah,
setting threshold. The other thing, my thought is always this drive for density is great, but it's just very problematic in a flood zone. And we don't always have to assume that we need greater density all the time. I know it's right next to downtown and everything else, but it's still, a flood zone is still problematic. We've got many other parts of Squamish that are perfectly developable, that aren't flood prone, problematic that way. So I question whether or not we really do need to be hunting for density so much, whether or not the developers want to see it there. So that's my comment, other than I totally agree with this last potential solution if that's the way that we want to go.
Sure. I think if you're going to go with 3 and you're listing some bonus density, I'd really ask for some serious bonus density and make it attractive. And if somebody's consolidating more than 2 parcels, then they need to step up and provide some real amenities. And maybe that's the opportunity to get your mid-block walkways or something. Maybe start drawing them, and they could be here or there, but get some ideas on paper for them to, if they're thinking of consolidation. Because I think either the status quo or going hard at it to really get what you want is the place to be, and in the middle you're just going to get it. I think you just put lipstick on the page.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time because you really don't know what you're going to get either way. So it's really just like right now, if you work with them, you might be able to kind of force the hand a little bit, but only so much. And if you go with option 3, I think you just at the mercy of time and what people want to do in their financial, if it's worth their while going forward with some of these projects too.
you're thinking that it's better to look at them individually as individual applications?
I get that we're essentially trying to get something out of it. For me personally, some of the biggest issues in there are just, I've only been there in winter, So I found that it's incredibly dark, and like you say, there's no sidewalk, so there's a lack of you feel like you're just on a road. There's no area for the public to walk in that zone, especially at night when it's dark. And a lot of people park on the road too, so it makes it worse. So I'm not sure what it's like in summer.
It's the same.
Okay, right.
A little brighter.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, for me, that's the main thing. I would be trying to get out of it, and then if you can try to use the overall master plan to then gain some additional connection points through there, that would be great. It's almost like you need primary and secondary goals, what you're trying to achieve in that complex, and then in my mind, it's going to be, like you say, going to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years before you start to see some positive results coming out of it. I don't really have a preference.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. It's good. Probably going to be a hybrid by the time we get through anyway.
Chris, do you have?
Yeah, sure. I like the hybrid between 1 and 3. So the big parcels do a rezoning and you identify them, because the developers are going to be able to do underground parking in an apartment or something dense. So I think it's worth neighborhood input on those, and then you can probably leverage the needs for parks or something at that railway end. I think experimentation is good. That's how we have solutions, is we innovate and see it and criticize it and then change it. So I think it's important to allow 3, and it just means your DP process and your DP area guidelines are going to have to be really creative and great. But it also unburdens the understaffed planning departments. If we do rezoning in council, we do rezoning for every parcel, we're just diluting a lot of other things we might need to focus on. So yeah, I think 1 and 3 hybrid would be really good. I think Susan's parked that idea of the front yard, and even considering off-street parking in some of those parklets could help alleviate some of the on-street parking, whether it's like a pull-off typology for the parking or something. So I think that some new street standards, that take into account the front yard could be really interesting. I wish there was a way to not just incentivize density. I wish there was a way for developers to get more of a parcel, like block coverage or something.
Well, that's not out of the question, I guess,
Just don't know what it looks like. It's like
Yeah.
you need to design the whole neighborhood, see the chaos, what it could be. But it'd be good to try to do it. Something I don't have an answer for, but density and height go hand in hand, I think, with public's understanding. And it creates one type of solution, but there's got to be, whether it's allowing smaller units, maybe reducing parking requirements for those smaller units, or if you're doing 250 square foot little affordable rentals, and they can only be rentals, maybe that's a good thing, and they don't need parking, but they have scooter parking or bike storage. I think it's really exciting. I think it's a great start, but I think we need to be innovative and aggressive. Number 3 does that. And limit the lot amalgamations, sorry.
Yeah.
So maybe that if you try to amalgamate 3, then you have to do a rezoning or something.
It'll be a block more.
Yeah, I think you obviously need to identify the parcels that could get you there, and maybe you give them more to do what your vision is. So there's, right, Mud 1 was a good thing that we didn't quite have the ideas were there, but we didn't mandate it. So I think this has so many more landowners, maybe it could happen. You say these 8 parcels are crucial to have walkway and will allow you to have this. Or something.
I think even if we went with option 3, which is a rezoning, we would still have guidelines on the side.
Yeah.
That express these things, yeah.
Yeah.
And what we potentially will do, there's a whole whack of new guidelines in the OCP. Should take some time to get familiar with the new ones at the ADP. But we can also attach DPA guidelines to the zone. They don't have to be in your OCP, so anything specific to this neighborhood, we can attach to.
Oh, I thought you were for sure anyways. I think that's really
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
Yeah, to get you the things you want, because OCP people reference, but they're also, you can skirt around them if they're not drastic enough, so.
Sandy?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Chris has sort of said, of like, if they're amalgamated lots, they're three or more, then it gets rezoning, and then, you know, there's an opportunity to look at, can we get either a laneway built that can be higher to access some of this at grade level? I mean, I just look at all of the housing that we're developing right now, it all has stairs. None of it can age in place, and we are aging.
Unless it's apartments, yeah. they have
Unless it's
bigger-
apartments, but, you know, we're land and townhouses.
Yeah.
And the floodplain, if we're not thoughtful about it, I mean, there's ways of doing it, but if we're not thoughtful, we're just building more stairs and, you know, and pedestrian access around this whole area is a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think that probably takes priority. I'm trying to wrap my head around, you know, if you're doing cottages, well, the cottages are, you know, in essence 2 stories. Again, how are you getting?
Well, they don't need to be, and I guess that's, you know,
Well,
I'm
if
just
they're
thinking
flood-
about this.
they're floodplain, they
No,
gotta-
but if you have surface parking, you know, if you raise the site, you can have a single-story cottage with your parking spot next to it. You don't have to have an indoor structured parking, you know, if that portion of the site is raised,
Yeah.
you've
But
got
then you
it.
have the side yard, like lock, like on Buckley where Target's new one is, right? Where you have a single family and then a big development and you have to put these walls.
Well,
It's
there's
like you
gonna
wish you
be,
could lift the whole,
Yeah.
yeah,
Everything.
but there is ways of getting
the waterfront.
accessible units at grade, you know, once you've raised the site. If-
Yeah, it's just how it, you know, how many of those lots,
Yeah.
how it's affecting
How
the
can you do it?
neighbor, and in
It's
essence, I
re-
mean, at the end of the day, it's still gonna affect their view corridor if you build up the land.
The land has to come up, you know, or the building, because the flood construction level is just not an option, and there's definitely going to be some really awkward fits between properties that are raised and ones that are lower, the older ones, that's,
Or the ground access in this neighborhood is unfortunately just not field accessible. You know, whereas like
No,
pulling onto the
I
waterfront, maybe we can.
appreciate that, I'm just saying, if there's gonna be, you know, a number of lots and amalgamate, and it's going to be,
Yeah.
you know, kind of townhouses or something along those lines, that at the basic level have minimum access to it.
I have to step out for a few minutes.
Jenna? Comment?
Yeah, I would agree. I think if there becomes a larger development, I think a rezoning process would be valuable. So I think I would agree with the hybrid of 1 and 3. I see value in that, being thoughtful of why it needs a rezoning and when. To me, what I keep thinking about is just the form and character as this community evolves from something really small, single family, into something larger. So I think density can be done in a way where that community feel is still retained. So some of the things that you spoke about with regards to having a really strong sidewalk, having that kind of area on the side with little parklets and little parking stalls, thinking about how we can enforce the parcels to have to contribute to that publicness at the portion of the front of their yard. I think that'll really create a really strong sense of community. And it becomes sort of irrelevant if it's still a single family house or a large townhouse in behind. You'll have that publicness that'll still keep that really rich form and character. So I think I would encourage that, pushing them as they put development idea forward, that public realm has to be
the focus.
the focus and the fundamentalness. And, you know, the comments about how do we get north-south connections and pedways, of course, those are also really important. But I think that loop should really feel like kind of the heart of the community, regardless of what the building is in behind. Because, as many people said, you're going to need a long driveway going along the whole length of that lot in order to access the townhouse units or whatever it may be. But just having that really strong public realm is going to be, I think, really just keep that character that those in the single-family houses are so concerned about losing, right?
There are DPA guidelines already about kind of
Yeah.
orienting your buildings to the street, and I think here, somehow making sure those walls facing, you don't have walls facing the street is probably more important here than almost anywhere I can think of, that reorienting the end units so their entrance is at the street, so it looks friendly and accessible from the street.
Yeah. And somehow that there's a publicness, that their
Yeah.
front yard is available for the community in a way.
Developers we've spoken to seem very open to that.
Yeah.
So I think, they, it's just a matter of kind of rethinking how you, instead of your little green area in the middle, it just gets shifted.
Yeah, because all those little green areas can collectively create a really big one. So it can make it really nice.
Yeah,
What?
I mean, not to repeat a lot of the comments, I do agree with, I think, across on what Chris and what Jen, what you're saying there's something about, I think, it's almost like be careful what you wish for a little bit here too, and I wonder if it just needs to go to another level, and it's actually calling it guidelines. Is there, or can there be a set of guidelines that people could reference at least, and then you've got a little more, something you can hang, people can hang their hat on, and you can further and say, this is the guidelines. Because the reason why I bring it up, I think it's coming up a little bit through this discussion, but there's an excellent job of going to the community and finding out what they want. That's all here. You see the comments, they're very clear. And from that, I think someone could actually come up with a set of, call it this neighborhood's, Wilson Creek's neighborhood microplans guidelines. Is it white picket fences? And the only reason why I think that's important is because I'm just thinking of some of my clients that might be interested in this area. They're going to say, I know some of them are really kind of, they don't know what some of the definitions are. They're going to say, what is a parquet? What is a parquet?
No, we would elaborate on this stuff, but that is a good point that, I guess, we've got three options in front of us. One of the options was to just keep option one and have guidelines. The challenge with guidelines is that they're not enforceable, I guess, and they will only kick in, or we won't get any of the extra goodies unless somebody's upzoning, and so that's kind of, but the guidelines will be part of this, and I think, the general guidelines in the new OCP are good, but we need to pick out and elaborate on what's important here, because they're actually quite massive to go through, to figure out, okay, which of these 200 guidelines really is important here in this neighborhood. So that is important, I agree.
But it's true, they're only guidelines. It's certainly valid. It's just that it's like that vision. Everybody needs to get onto some train, even though they are guidelines. It's good to have that reference.
Yeah.
So I think what probably could happen, that's why 1 and 3 work. 3 is, I think, just going to force a rezoning for some developers. They're just going to look at it and go, okay, I want to do rental housing. And then, well, is that rental housing? Can I do senior rental? Is there a definition around residential? Because it just seems to suggest residential for this area.
Well, this is just kind of a broad brush that I was trying to fit on one slide. But, if we go with option 3 with a new zone, or else amending the RM1 zone, whichever route we follow, it will be far more detailed. Well, in order to put a density structure in place, you actually have to be quite specific and talk about how much extra FAR are you going to get in return for each of these things. So we will have to be much more refined than what I've put up here. And yes, that's a question about, do seniors do you get, if you're doing seniors housing, is that more important? You know, my understanding of rental housing in the community is all age groups are really short of housing. So I,
Depends on your definition of the use, I guess.
yeah,
It could be, are you allowed to choose a hospital? Could I, given the housing crisis in this corridor, can I build a hospital? And what is the sizes of the units? Can I house smaller units and have a different yield given the parking was reduced?
and that's the difficulty of going for option 3 is we don't know any of that stuff. You know, somebody's going to come forward with a whole brand new idea that we haven't even dreamed of, that makes sense, but we haven't thought of. So that's one reason you keep your terms a bit general, is to fit everybody in, or people can always choose to rezone. I think what we're trying to do with option 3 is have a path forward that's kind of quite explicit, that you can get to this density if you do these certain things that we know we want, but there will still be things that come forward that don't fit within that framework.
And you would want to encourage, I think, live, work, senior living, community living perhaps, and then perhaps the size and types of units. So I'm wondering if it's guideline driven or use definition driven. It certainly has, I mean, the comments from the public are incredibly supportive about diversity and diversity.
Yes, but they're not too keen on it being big.
Yeah.
You know?
Because it'll keep land value down. As soon as you dangle the carrot of higher in density, all of a sudden the price people are going to get in the land goes speculatively up. So
I think that's already happening,
Yeah,
from what
sure.
I understand, because of the pre-zoning that's already there. These are not cheap properties to assemble, which is why the people are looking for more density. You know, it's not a cheap place to develop.
It forces the rezoning, I think, just from what my experience, the Crosby understands that as soon as you say, well, I'm taking 20 feet for a walkway, say it's 20, 10 or 5 feet, then the developer just says, I need more density.
Yeah.
You're taking this, I need that. By the way, it's higher. And then you can say, well, then you got to rezone. Right? So
Yeah.
this is sort of.
Well, with option 3, what we're trying to say to people is, you know, we want a walkway here. You can go from point 6 to point 8 if you give us that walkway, and stay out of the rezoning process. You know, so there's a certain level of change and density increase that can happen without rezoning, and that's attractive to some developers, not all, because some of them will want to do more than what we're permitting. And if they do, we'll have some guidelines to say, okay, here's some additional things we're looking for. And, you know, you have to be realistic about your wish list too, you know.
Yeah, thanks, that's great and perfect. Good comments. I heard a couple times, get something on paper. And I really do think that's important too. You know, just with a big fat pin right where the trail may go. Even if it's fat enough to take up a couple lots, it just shows the direction and the desire, and where it goes is up to how the neighborhood develops, if it develops that way. So that would be a key thing. And I like the guidelines, I think that's great. No matter what we do, we have to get the wording in, no matter what gets built there, to get that sidewalk. So whatever the bylaw we come forward with, there has to be wording in there to get that sidewalk. And, you know, we talk about reduced parking all the time, and, you know, I'm having real issues in the downtown with parking, or we're all gonna have real issues in the downtown parking soon. But if you reduce the parking, how about housing units that have no parking stall? So you can buy that apartment or rent that apartment, but you can't have a car. And because it's downtown, then those people would have their bikes. You know. But if we put in 100 units and have 100 parking stalls and 200 cars show up, anyway. So, and what you were saying about hospices and seniors housing, boarding houses and co-housing, all make me happy. As far as, like getting density in an area, allow or encourage, a senior housing complex or a boarding house or hospice or co-housing, which are new things that are coming.
Some of those things, I should just clarify, are actually already permitted in the current RM zones. You can do community care, rooming house, lodging, assisted living. Those things are actually already in there. I didn't list them because...
Would you mention them all in your guidelines? I mean, would you mention that or just leave that?
Well, we can, that list of things can be expanded. I mean, co-housing is a form of ownership. It's still, and what we zone for is use. Whether, co-housing comes in many forms, but is typically either a townhouse or an apartment in terms of use. But it's a form of ownership, and we aren't legally even allowed to zone for ownership. We can't, in our zoning bylaws, specify, the type of ownership structure.
Co-housing's more than that because it has shared laundry rooms and shared
Yes.
commercial kitchen.
And those could be below the floodplain, so I started, all of a sudden you have encouraged that type of use that would activate the ground plane, right?
Yeah.
Shared kitchen, I don't know.
I'll see what they do here. I'll talk to Jonas about the co-housing as a use. I thought that just fell under your normal multifamily, so I'll just check. There's one near where I live, and it's, it is co-housing in terms of those shared facilities, but it's also a townhouse structure, so
Yes.
with shared kind of amenity.
That's one, yeah, but even like how we think of senior housing from decades ago is they need support of food and nurse, and they don't have vehicles maybe, but that also works for young families nowadays, potentially, right? So that's the model I'm starting to see even in Vancouver, they're kicking the tire at some of those. So I really like that idea, like
Or a
the ground.
combination.
Yeah, and then you don't have parking on site, the ground plane's activated, you're more compact, and you have support, jobs in the neighborhood.
Well, assisted living, which is
Yeah.
permitted, kind of encompasses that. That's a
Yeah.
pretty broad term for a bunch of varieties of.
But that could work for co-housing too.
Yeah.
And you're right into the color of intergenerational housing. It's not just for seniors. So. And then you loop in the daycare on the ground plane too. I think whatever uses we can encourage, other than parking and storage on the ground plane, would be a good
I
incentive.
don't think you can relax parking. It's just the reality of the world.
Yeah, but certain uses don't require it. Like a
Relax.
daycare is a type of use
Certainly.
that
Yeah.
isn't living, right?
Yeah.
So if you allow that on the ground plane, then we don't have just garages and more cars, but we have use and we have jobs and we have daycare. So
We have a 46 unit complex going in with one parking stall.
It's a huge
One.
issue. It's just reality that
Look at
people,
the West End.
even if you build a unit that has no parking stall, someone might come in and rent that unit expecting that you're gonna park their truck on the public road. And then that creates, there is no way of stopping people from having cars.
well, that's a bylaw police initiative.
But it's also kind of the reality, I don't know the exact number, but I think Ted, it's 50% of people commute to Vancouver for their work.
But that's because we're providing it, I would argue. I would say if you provide jobs and more affordable housing, if we're building big garages and storage, we're upping the price of those rental units, right? You're paying for that space. The developer doesn't just suck up that cost. That gets passed on to the buyer. So if you do 250, 300 square foot rental units with no parking, that could be a $200,000 unit or a $1,200 a month rental.
I know it sounds good that way, but in reality and practicality, it just never plays out that way. It just creates other issues.
In Squamish, yes.
But
that's 'cause we're-
a bylaw, because we're talking enforce it, but it would be 219 covenant, would covenant on the land, like if you're gonna occupy this space, you don't have a car.
But then you would just have to.
There's
Whatever
workarounds.
Go park
person
it
is
2 blocks
like-
down.
Yeah, well, that's what's.
And then you park at the Wilson Slough like
Parking was good.
everybody else does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it just comes back to definition a lot, because I mean, if it's senior ratios are 1 and 3, 1 and 4, and then, but then you go, well, where's the staff parks, and the staff parking ratio, so it asks more questions around the definition, I think.
Yeah.
The other side of it is, if it is parking, it's kind of parking. Yeah, electric vehicles.
Certainly if we had a world-class bus system and transit to and from Vancouver and everything else, it would be a different story, but It's not even in the picture right now.
What, to not have a car?
No, transit.
Oh, that,
No.
but I mean, a lot of people don't have cars.
Or they work from home. The number of people who are forced to work from home because they don't want to commute or don't want to rent is interesting in Squamish because they want to play right outside. So it's this, the whole live work. I wish there was a neighborhood where we take live work seriously and allow the workspace to be below floodplain or allow it to, yeah.
I
It's
think
hard.
some of this is provincial regs
It
too,
is.
and I'm gonna talk to David, you know, their floodplain guru here is,
Well, in the
Just wanna-
downtown you can, and in the highlands you can.
We can have, yeah, no floodplain, no, but we can, yeah, it's tricky.
I'm sure they've had this discussion as they've prepared their
Wrap it
flood
up, yeah.
Yeah, but
plan.
if you allow an office to be below floodplain, people could have an office in their house. And people will abuse it and rent it or have a rent room.
The kitchen is an interesting idea too.
Lots of things, right?
Yeah.
But so far that you have to separate them as separate buildings, separate
Speaking
spaces.
up. Put speaking up and
Yeah.
you're awake when it starts flooding, so you get out.
I'll
Well, I think
I'll
people
follow
know
up
that
with,
floodplain issue.
they've got one person on staff here who's the expert in flood construction, and I'll just run that past him, see if, what else we can put as an exemption.
So we're not voting on this, it was just a discussion, questions you got? what
Yeah,
you
no, I got a
need?
lot of information and, you know, some of it confers with what we heard from council, but you've given us some additional directions that we need to pull together. It's, you know, it's actually a fairly complex neighborhood, even though it's small, but I think we've got,
It helped me listening to everything.
yeah, no,
so
it's been very helpful to me too.
I have a bunch more to say next time council has a meeting, but just on the round table part of this, I really think this was a good idea, this little circling off this zone and doing what we've done on this, and I see this being a really good tool for the district. Going into neighborhoods, any of the neighborhoods close to the shopping areas, you know, the pressure's on them to start doing this. It's happening everywhere, so I really enjoyed this. So if anyone thinks of anything to make this process better for us, write it down. And when we do the minutes next time, you can bring it up, you know. So that's on the, what did you call that little area?
Microplan?
Microplan.
I think it's similar to other neighborhoods too, like
Yeah.
by Tamlis. The
Yeah.
long lots of land.
Oh, I think it's great.
Yeah, but a lot of the older neighborhoods kind of
Yeah.
look like this,
And
even
there's-
up to Bracondale.
On another note, I mean, Sarah said something about all houses have stairs. Are we doing enough for the accessibility in development?
No.
No,
So,
but I think some of it's out of the developer's hands, unfortunately. with
well, I think
floodplain.
we should get that down as an agenda item and have a nice discussion about that because, you know, I mean, we've been sitting at this table for 10 years and we're still not doing enough.
There's been a few new developments, there's some good looking, Solitaire one where there's even polygons. One, there's the Lockoff Suites in the ground level. I think it's the floodplain is a really,
Well,
Yeah,
that's
it's-
right. You know, Walderfront Landing, you know, your comments, they went back and revised the units to get the parking level with the entrance. And
Well, I just think it
so,
would be good
on
to
a
talk.
small scale, we're making some changes, but no, it's tough.
you could mandate a percentage, right, is the way you kind of, same with percentage of rental, percentage of accessible suites, especially in the apartments. I mean, that's an easy one from my design standpoint. It's not hard to make an apartment suite accessible.
We're doing that already, but I just think
No,
that.
not well.
Not
If you
mandated, though.
Look at the senior center. They
Yeah,
built
no,
all
but-
those units and they're beige on beige with carpet and, I mean, it's
Well,
just
yeah.
poorly done. and-
Interior design, yes, but I mean, on the next one that we just had in front of us last night, you know, I mean, there's 5% are accessible units, so the big doors and the low switches and, so I mean, so I say that's what we're doing that now. But I mean, here, we're having all this discussion about it now, but I think it warrants an agenda so that we all can prepare and come in and have a wholehearted discussion rather than 5 minutes before the end of the meeting.
Well, maybe David could be a part of that, because I feel like all the neighborhoods that make sense for ground-oriented cottage flats are floodplain, or flat, and you can't do it. So, I think maybe some overarching information for that discussion? Maybe
Okay.
James the one to do it, or I
Well,
don't.
there's a couple of elements to what Ted's raising. I mean, there's the whole flood construction limitations, but there's also communities that have gone much further than Squamish in their accessible requirements and have kind of spelled them out in a lot more detail. I mean, that's certainly a route Squamish could go, is kind of go to the next level.
Yeah.
I would toss this in just as a part of that discussion. You know, on a couple of developments, the developers have told me they're perfectly happy to build even fully accessible units, but the problem is that they have no control over whether somebody who actually needs an accessible unit moves into it. So they put, you know, a bunch of extra effort and cost in, not huge, I don't think, in terms of cost, but the unit gets underutilized. I don't quite know how you manage that, you know, especially in condo settings or, you know, private developments. If it's some type of facility, you can manage that. But in terms of private stratas, you've got no control over who ultimately buys that unit. So that's part of the challenge from the developers' point of
Over
view.
50 years
You know,
at least.
It's funny, my sister had a place on Salt Spring, and due to some unfortunate events for her, I had to go over and help her finish it. And she had a friend in a wheelchair, and so I started on one side of the yard, and I went all around that yard, and I made it so she could get up into her back door in a wheelchair. She bitched. Oh, yeah, meh, 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 meh. You know, her friend has thanked her for the last 15 years. So when I built my house, and my house is up 5 feet from the road, I did the same thing. You come in my backyard, you can get on a little trail, goes all around, it has to go out into the backyard to start getting the access to get into the house. You can get in on my main floor in a wheelchair. So I'm not really talking about the building inside being like an apartment with all the accessible units inside. I'm talking about accessible from the road to come visit.
Yeah, it's called visitable,
Yeah,
right? So, I mean, it has a really profound impact on people if you
yeah,
early into yourself, got a visitor. But you go slightly further so that you have hallways that are wide enough to get through, doorways that are wide enough to get through, and in the bathroom, you put some backing around the toilet so you can put grab bars in the future.
yeah.
Profound impact.
Yeah.
See?
And not much cost.
And at very low cost, like.
So we have to have that
Municipalities
discussion.
incentivizing, it's almost like the LEED standard, but it's for accessibility, and they get bonuses
I
for.
was recently
Well,
looking at the city of North
and
Vancouver.
Oh, maybe
The
that's.
neighborhood development has a revenue stream to accessible.
There's one incentive I just read in the paper, and it was like, there's 3 standards, and now some developers are posting, we're hitting gold standard for accessibility in this development. And in
It's
turn,
the Rick Hansen.
Yeah, that's what it was.
accessibility assessment program.
people were adopting
There's
it.
one in Port Moody that's
Okay,
just
so
doing it.
Maybe that.
Okay, can we wind this down here? We've had enough discussion. Is there anything else? I think we've had a round table, so let's motion to terminate the meeting. Jana, second there.
Who seconded?
Sarah.
There. You moved it.
Jana. Okay.
Thank you, guys. It was
Yeah,
very
good work.
helpful.
That's a lot of work.